investment.
Huge investment, challenging all of German business. It's, by the way, an interesting lesson to the United States that if you build a political movement, which was done partly by the Green Party, partly by the Socialist and Linke parties in Germany, and of course by the Fukushima disaster, which frightened the German people on a scale it's hard to overstate. You put all those together, you had a political movement. The Green Party surged in votes against Mrs. Merkel. She really had no choice. And suddenly, when the political will was there, the thing that all the businesses had said was inconceivable turned out not only to be conceivable, but to be done, and done by the same politicians who said it couldn't be done. It's a lesson to everybody about what is and is not a manageable, possible change of direction on something as fundamental as nuclear energy and the basis for the electricity without which the German economic machine could not last 10 minutes. The trickle down never happened. So the mass of people are watching a crisis that hurts them, then followed by a recovery program that bypasses them, and are then told that since the government had to borrow for that failed recovery program, because look, it didn't solve our unemployment, they now have to pay in the form of belt tightening, austerity, fewer public employees, fewer government services, a committee of the Congress figuring out how much to cut Social Security and Medicaid. This is an awful story. You are damaged by a crisis. You are bypassed by a recovery program for which you are now being asked to pay. It is intolerable. As I mentioned regarding Germany, you have here now in the United States an elite political class intertwined with a dominant business community that are so hell-bent on making sure they're okay and they're safe and they're recovered and they're benefited that they think they can push the cost of all of this, whether it succeeds or fails in helping the average person, onto the average person. And eventually, and this I think is what Occupy Wall Street proves, you're going to provoke the mass of people who have accepted a lot these 4 years of crisis into saying, that's it, no more, it's enough, and we're going to fight back. And you may come to rue the day that you pushed it, a deal that was working well for you, so far that you destroy the goose that laid your golden egg.
You've written that Occupy Wall Street ends capitalism's alibi. What do you mean by that?
I think what it tries to suggest, Occupy Wall Street, is that something that has been used as the justification for American capitalism almost since the birth of our nation has been the slogan, capitalism delivers the goods. So yes, rich people are much better off than average Americans. Yes, there are outrageous behavior by those at the super rich with their mansions and all of that. But nonetheless, we are willing to kind of live with it because capitalism delivers the goods. Meant rising standard of living, that thing we call the American dream, available to people if they work hard, that kind of story. We're now living through a period of time where the American capitalism isn't delivering the goods. For the mass of people, it's delivering one piece of bad news after another. A program of the government you counted on is not going to be available. You thought you could retire after a lifetime of work and get a reasonable Social Security. Well, you're going to have to wait longer, and what you're going to get is a lot less. You thought you might have a secure medical access program. Well, that's being nibbled at and taken away. In other words, you're not getting from capitalism a rising standard of living. You used to be able to imagine sending your kids to college. Well, now you either have to forget about it or you have to saddle your children with a level of debt when they come out of school that makes them a literal prisoner of this economy rather than someone who can flourish in it. You put all that together, and capitalism's support, its alibi, its justification of delivering the goods has turned into its opposite. Capitalism now delivers the bads, and that's why people are questioning and challenging it.
And you've said that Occupy Wall Street is changing the country, specifically talking about um, a change in New York Times coverage of economic issues, particularly dealing with the issue of poverty.
Yes, the Occupy Wall Street is changing everything in the United States, and one would have to make a long list of the ways it's doing it. How it is inspiring college students with the idea that change is really possible. After decades of teaching college students that the only thing for them to do is to strive as individuals to get a good job on Wall Street or somewhere else, to make a killing, to be looking out for number one, to be individualistic in often the worst senses of the term, we're suddenly seeing a movement that says to bright and some of our brightest young people, no, there's a path to social change that will benefit not just you, but all of the others in a collective and community kind of action. I mean, I could go on, but not the least of the impact of Occupy Wall Street is the subtle ways in a million people's minds that the dichotomy between the 1% at the top and the 99% everywhere else is something that ought to be part of your personal business, your personal action. And I saw one example that you referred to that struck me. In the New York Times of Saturday, November 19th, 2011, there's a front page article that begins to talk about new poverty statistics. And when you read the article, you learn that these are really not new statistics. These are answers that the U.S. Census Bureau provided to questions from New York Times reporters about the real extent of poverty. That is, take into account the different costs of living, take into account how much support people get from the government, how much taxes they have to pay, really work out how much money they have left after all of these things are taken into account. Can they live a comfortable life, or are they poor? And not to go into the details, but the basic conclusion right there in the New York Times article is that when you take into all those things into account, here's the number. 1/3 of the United States today, 2011, is poor or near poor. And by the way, those definitions are harsh. That you have nothing extra. You cannot afford most of what we call the American dream if you're in that group. And we're talking 100 million Americans. 1/3 of our country, roughly, is in that condition. And so when the next time someone says to me, why are these people complaining, these folks in Occupy Wall Street? Well, you have a really clear, simple, straightforward answer. What kind of country is it that would give 1% of the people untold luxury and wild excess of consumption while condemning 100 million of their fellow citizens to a harsh life of self-denial, of failure to enjoy not what the 1% do, but even the most basic access to health care, education, and the other things that a civilized society ought to give to its people. Of course, there should be a movement. That is an outrageous way of organizing this society. And my hat is off to the New York Times, who I criticize often, for at least having the courage to take an idea I think they got from Occupy Wall Street and take it a few steps further and do some of the research Occupy Wall Street inspires and that Occupy Wall Street is clearly a response to.
That 1/3 statistic evokes FDR's famous comment of, I see a nation 1/3 ill-clad, ill-housed, ill-fed.
Right, and it brings it to mind to everybody I've been telling this story to, because we were supposed to have followed FDR when he said that his proposals, Social Security, unemployment insurance, federal hiring program of the third, that these things would not only get the country out of the Great Depression, but, as he said so often, also make sure we never suffer these crises and conditions again. Every president in the United States has presided over an economic downturn. That's how often we have them. And every president followed Roosevelt, Republican and Democrats alike, by promising that their measures would not only get us out of the Great Depression or the Little Depression, but would make sure we don't have it again. By that standard, every president was a liar because every president failed to do that. Look at the crisis we're in now. They have not been willing to change this economic system in such a way that it wouldn't continue to visit on all of us these horrific and divisive crises.
Would it be accurate to say that of that 100 million, there's in poverty that a disproportionate percentage are people of color.
Well, you'd have to look at the numbers, but given everything we know about this society, yes, I think it's safe to say that if you broke it down, that the proportion of people of color in that poverty is greater than their proportion in the population at large. But I think it's even more important to stress that if you have 100 million people in the country that are in this condition, it cuts across all ethnic, all religious, and all regional differences. You're talking about every state in America. We have 50 states. If we have 100 million people, it means we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in every state, large and small, who are in that situation. They live across town from where you live. They live in the community next door to the one you're in, or you're living in one of those communities. So they're not invisible, no matter how much our culture tries to keep them. Indeed, I sometimes think that the reason the 1% smashed down or tried to the Occupy movement is because they are forcing everybody to see what they'd rather not see, to confront what they don't really want to believe, but know in their heart of hearts is true, that the 1% have way too much, and the rest of us are required to live on way too little. In the history of the human race, that situation, sooner or later, provokes an explosion. And what's frightening the 1% is that they know that too.